Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being part of this session on financing this summer school on feminist and ecological macroeconomics. Today, we have the pleasure to have with us Marie Mellor, who is Professor Emerita of Social Sciences at Northumbria University, and that I guess everyone knows in this summer school because she's one of the most prominent scholars in ecofeminism. And then we have also Giorgos Kallis, who is a professor at the Institute of Environmental Science and Technology at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, very much well known in the field of ecological economics, political ecology, and particularly for his work on degrowth. I think today we get a chance to get a little bit more into the strategies. If we want to move to a more just and sustainable world, how do we get there? What kind of strategies do we need? And this can be both in terms of policy making, and we could discuss the role of the state, for example, but also in terms of, for instance, social movements and civil society organization, and so on and so forth. And for instance, Giorgos Kallis, in the second part of his recorded lecture, presented to us different ideas in terms of strategies, and also gave us some example of policies. But obviously, one of the central questions that always emerge there is, how do we pay for all this? And here, I think, is really where the contribution by Marie Mellor comes in terms of looking at money as a public resource. So the lectures by the two speakers of today, Mary and Giorgos, already introduced us to the topic, and today we can go more into the details. So let's get into the lecture of today. You know the structure already. So first, I will ask the teachers very kindly to summarize their lectures so that we can refresh our mind. These days we have been getting a lot of information, and as I said, this is a crash course, so you're not supposed to retain all the information, but to get an idea of what is out there. So I'll first ask Giorgos and then Mary to kindly summarize their lecture for us. Thank you very much for being here today.
How many minutes do I have, Fede?
It's flexible. I normally suggest 5 to 10 minutes, but it's really up to you.
No, I don't think I need so much. I don't think I need so much, because I think you've watched it, or I hope you've watched it, because it's an elaborate argument that cannot be summarized perhaps so fast. But there were two parts of the argument. The first argument was questioning the idea of green growth, which is the dominant idea right now among international organizations, governments, intellectuals, the prevalent intellectuals, let's say, as our best hope for combating what seems to be a disaster unfolding already in terms of climate change. But also they promote it as a potential solution to other problems, to the economy in general, to relaunching the economy in the global north and combating poverty in the global south. So there is the idea of green growth, which means greening growth and also having growth by investing in green activities. Slightly two different ideas. So in the first part of my presentation, I challenged the empirical foundation of this idea by showing that to the best of our knowledge, economic growth, GDP growth, expansion of the current capitalist system is tightly linked to resource and energy use. Not necessarily carbon emissions, I made this distinction, but definitely to resource, not definitely according to the data I provided, to resource and energy use. From carbon emissions, growth could potentially be decoupled by transitioning to another form of energy, but given the emergency and the speed with which this has to be done, with the data I showed and the models I revisited, it seems very unlikely that with the economy growing 2 or 3% per year, it will be possible to reduce emissions to the extent that they have to be reduced within 10 or 20 years. That's one part of seeing the argument against green growth. The other argument to seeing it is that this, and that's a little bit of a new argument that I didn't have in my presentation, but which I'm thinking these days, that this green growth argument in general postpones the solution to sometime in the future. So basically tells us, you know, we have to do our best now, develop new sources of energy, and at some point fossil fuels will naturally be substituted by growing this new form of energy. And I think that's a very wrong way to go about it. It's a very wrong way to go about it because it's very likely that in the current capitalist system, instead of substituting, you're just gonna have extra forms of energy, cleaner forms of energy, on top of fossil fuels that they will continue to be used, because there is no strong reason why fossil fuels will not be used, given that they are cost-wise, they are similar or cheaper in some instances than renewable forms of energy. The second problem I see with that is that, and that's the new thing that I have to say, that in the last few months we see that perhaps the models of the climate scientists were over-optimistic, and that the effects of climate breakdown are being felt earlier than we were expecting them. So people are saying that we might already be on 1.5 degrees of heating, or it could be that we underestimated what effects we are going to see at 1 degree of heating, which means that the effects we're going to see at 1.5 are going to be even worse. So the current heat wave, for example, in the Western North America is way out of any expectation of the models or of the historical record. There are the level of drought that it's being experienced again there is unprecedented. The scale of wildfires year after year, you know, it's like one in 1,000-year events happening every year, almost, you know. So floods yesterday in Germany. That's no longer a warning about 2050, you know. This starts being like a little bit like the epidemic. It's an effect that starts being felt now. And we are already late, because no matter what we do now, and until we start absorbing carbon from the atmosphere, we are already stuck with this climate. So in that sense, I think the priority right now, not that it is not among people that they are minded in this, but the priority right now should be to stop extracting fossil fuels. Really stop extracting fossil fuels. It's like the same as in the epidemic saying closing the bars, or saying that you can't meet more than 10 people. It's like it's an existential threat right now that's affecting everyone. It has to happen now. It's not like we have to wait if by 2050 there will be enough renewables to put fossil fuels out of the market. That's not the approach. The approach is we have to stop extracting fossil fuels now. And the question is like, how does the economy adapt to that? This is where the idea of degrowth comes, which was the second part of my lecture. How can we start thinking about economies that they are not based on growth, and they can redistribute and they can function without the need for fossil fuels and for a high-powered economy? I gave there some policies that we think are relevant in this direction, and I focused a little bit more on the politics and the cultural changes that they are necessary, and the argument that we made in our book of the importance of founding this transition, post-growth or degrowth, however you want to call it, in the commons, and in creating new common senses around the management of our affairs in the commons, and then giving a political expression to these common senses with municipal and then regional and national political movements that they are based on the reclaim of the commons and on the transition away from this catastrophic capitalist fossil fuel and growth economy. It's a coincidence, but I think it's a nice complementarity with the presentation of Mary today. That in our book, we don't talk so much about money. We just have one paragraph, and in my presentation, I don't talk about money, but I think how the monetary system works and how money can be part, how the way we produce and distribute money can be part of this transition is fundamental. And I'm a big fan of Mary's work. I've read her last two, I think, books. I really enjoyed them, and I enjoyed hearing her presentation yesterday. I have some questions and reservations also, or things I'm grappling with when we think about public money or new ways of producing money, and what could this mean if we were to think in degrowth terms, but I'll leave that for later. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Giorgos, for that nice summary. So, Mary, whenever you are ready, you can go with the summary of your own lecture. Thanks.
Okay, right. I appreciate Giorgos's analysis of the problems we face, and we are certainly in a desperate situation. We need radical change. We need to implement it very quickly. The overall point I'm making about the analysis I've done of money systems is that we don't have to start from scratch. We don't have to overthrow the present system and invent a whole new one. What we've got is reinterpret and reclaim the system we have, particularly sovereign money as a public resource. I dare say we'll go into to speak that later. If so, you could have that diagram up, then I could speak to that. Yeah. Now, I brought this diagram up because I think this summarizes the way my ideas have been working over the years. As you can see, it's a cross-axis of between for-profit and not-for-profit, and monetized and non-monetized, giving you four cells. The starting point for ecofeminism, or at least my ecofeminism, is the top right-hand corner. That is the externalities that the present dominant market economy, monetized economy, pushes outside of the monetized system and doesn't acknowledge the costs, or at least doesn't monetize the costs of the impact on the ecosystem and unpaid labor. And this is where my particular, what I developed as materialist ecofeminism, is that there is a connection between the ecosystem and unpaid labor, which is predominantly what could be described as women's work or body work or domestic labor. The connection here is, I see it as a material one in terms of the levels of, it's a common experience of exploitation by the ecosystem and unpaid labor. It's not an essential affiliation of women with nature. It doesn't mean to say that women are kinder or better people to nature, or that they're more essentially natural beings. All humans are embodied. All humans are embedded in the environment, and we have to start from, as many people have pointed out, the under-laboring, it's often associated as an iceberg, that the market is the tip of an iceberg and that all these externalities are piling in underneath. A lot of ecofeminism concentrates on the bringing down to the next square down underneath, the non-monetized not-for-profit, and this is obviously the most favoured form of economic and social and environmental connections, often described as the care economy and the intrinsic value of nature. Now, some of the early ecofeminism and green thinking generally went very romantic about this section, that this is the pure, more ecological way to live. I'm not altogether sure that this non-monetized not-for-profit is automatically a good section. I mean, non-pre-market, pre-state societies can be destructive. So I don't think it's a pure and impure difference between the two models. I think there's something overlap. And one of the things I've made a point about in terms of the care economy is that it tends to be women's work, domestic labour. It's seen as unpaid and therefore can be seen as altruistic. But right from the start of my work, I said in many ways, this is an imposed altruism. Therefore, the society and patriarchal society, as well as the market as a separate function, exploits the care economy, intrinsic nature, and the externalities. So it's not these cells aren't clear cut. So my area that I've concentrated on in recent books is obviously the market, for-profit and monetized. And this is where most of the degrowth arguments come from. Talking about the market and various aspects of the search for profit and etc., including the externalities brought in from the for-profit but non-monetized section. But I again, on the point about avoiding essentialism, I don't say men in market bad, women in care economy good. I don't see them as the flesh and blood people. I see them, particularly in the market, the construct economic man is carved out of human existence in nature. And economic man can be female. And male and female live the disembodied, transcendental, seemingly unconnected, ununderpinned, free-floating economic man. But of course, economic man is rooted in the externalities, is rooted in the care economy. The area that I pay most attention to more recent work is the bottom left-hand square, which is the monetized and not-for-profit. Because a lot of the early thinking was to say, well, let's get rid of money, let's get rid of profit, let's get rid of the formal economy. And I don't think this is the way forward in modern complex societies. So what I've been doing is looking at the role of money in the public and social economy, which uses money, but uses it in not-for-profit. And in terms of the difference between the two, I've talked about the market being debt-based money and the public and social being sovereign money, which may or may not be democratized. I think I've probably talked enough and I've probably confused everybody, but I hope that that makes some sense of where I've been going.
It was really excellent, Mary. I think these initial summaries of your lectures are important to locate us again in the topic of today's session. So now I would invite Giorgos to comment on Mary's lecture, and then she can respond. Thanks.
Yeah, as I said, I really appreciate Mary's argument, because one of the there are two ways with which it interacts with the growth or intersects with the growth. The first is, from my perspective, no, there are many ways, I'm sure. The first is we understand that the money system is part of what we call the growth imperative. So we understand that if banks lend money and they expect to get more money back as a result, this is an engine of the demand for the economy to grow in order to pay back debts. So ideas on how we can break out of this system are important. I think Mary's work goes in this direction. How to produce money without money that doesn't have to grow constantly, no? But you don't have to give more money back as a result. So in that sense, it's really important. And in the second, I think it is important because there are, when we were writing with Federico the book on the case for degrowth, we had 5 policy proposals, and then I was sometimes, was a little bit pie in the sky, because if you try to budget everything we were calling for, this needed not a degrowth economy, but a growth economy, because we wanted universal basic income, we wanted a Green New Deal without growth, we wanted universal basic services. So not only an income, but you also get free public services. Then you work less, so you're paid the same and you work less. So these are our proposals, and these proposals have a price tag, and this price tag can be high. So the question of how do you finance these things is important, and I think there is where the argument of Mary that we can inverse the logic, and rather than say how do you pay with taxes for this spending, but rather whether you want to prioritize this spending and put all the money there instead of going somewhere else this money and supporting this type of economy. Instead of putting money, I don't know, to build new houses and extend airports, you put them there, is also helping us think a little bit more creatively about how do we finance this transition. Okay, my questions for Mary. two questions. So the first one is there is a lot of buzz around now, because everything that happens in the US is always more popular, no? Around this modern monetary theory and the work of Stephanie Kelton. And everyone refers now to the modern monetary theory, everyone in our small world, no? On Twitter, they keep telling us, oh, you should look in the modern monetary theory. Jason Hickel has been writing about degrowth and modern monetary theory as an idea of also for the global south to take an independent path. I haven't read any of that, so I've only read your work, Mary. But I want to ask you, is there anything different in this work and this modern monetary theory than what you've already said? Or is it the same thing with different words and different points of emphasis? Or is it something new or something that you disagree with on this modern monetary theory? Do you agree with it? Do you think it's important? Is it people who do the same thing with you or not? So that's my first question. And my second point, there is a little bit of a tension, I think, on the idea that with degrowth, we will have to do less in general. No? The economy would have to produce different things, but also less, overall slow down, no? Not use fossil fuels, etc. And the idea that the spigot of money is going to open, no? And then we're going to have money to give to the things we find important. So I still wonder, how is this matching going to take place? So how will the governments know that they are not overspending given ecological limitations? In the current system, I understand that this is done because money is produced for whatever people are asking loans from, no? So that's the way there is some correspondence. That's not an ecological correspondence, but there is a correspondence supposedly with the demand of the economy, no? Like you want to do something, you go and ask for a loan, no? That's not true, no? Because as Mary explained, most of the loans are in order to buy houses and speculate in the market or play in the stock exchange, etc. Okay, but at least there is some correspondence. So if I understand well, in the model of Mary, the correspondence is going to be a democratic system. So you're going to have public participatory budgets where people are going to decide where are the priorities to spend. But how will people know whether what they decide to spend can be ecologically supported, you know? Let's say with less fossil fuels. So I can imagine a scenario where people meet here in Barcelona and they decide, you know, we want to spend in good things, but they say we want to spend in, I don't know, building everything renewable or building new hospitals but all these things are going to demand fossil fuels, they're going to demand materials from other parts of the world. So I see there a potential mismatch, like of overspending and not being constrained ecologically, no? And there is the problem of inflation on that, but there is also the problem of how is this spending constrained? By whom? Just by people discussing or by what else? These are the two questions. So one is the difference with modern monetary theory, and the other is like, how is this process of money producing for spending constrained ecologically?
Right. Yeah, your first question was about modern monetary theory. Certainly, I was very much enthused by that thinking when it came out. Really, around the early part of this century, I think 2004 was some of the, there was a clutch of books. I mean, there was some before that, and obviously some 100 years before that, but I certainly felt very, but modern monetary theory has been evolving over the years, over the last 20, 30 years. And there's some of the theory about the analysis of what money is, that money is debt, and some of the theoretical areas I wasn't convinced of. And also because it was very Keynesian to start with, it was very much about job guarantee as the gap. If the market is failing to provide, then like Keynes suggested, that the state should step in and provide jobs until people can find money and find jobs in the private market, which made the private market the main market and the state as being supplementary. I see it the other way around completely, and I don't think MMT makes this totally clear. I see the state economy, the sovereign economy, as being the stronger economy, and we can see that in the pandemic and in the 2007-8 financial crisis, that the state could perfectly well fill the gap, and the idea that the state is borrowing is just a nonsense. All the money that we've spent, say in the UK, on the furloughing and the rescuing people from the pandemic, it's nearly all held by the Bank of England. So it's the state lending to the state. So this illusion that somehow the state is borrowing off the private market. So I've been much more, I think, forceful that we really are monetarily a public economy, and we have the myths and illusions of the market, particularly stoked by neoliberalism. But in fact, this is a complete misunderstanding, and I've called the neoliberal economics handbag economics, because it's got the state as like a household. And so there's some differences between my work and how MMT developed. But Stephanie Kelton's most recent book is very much more about putting a positive view of the positive and importance of state funding, and that the ability of the state to create and circulate money in its own right is much more important in her work, and she draws much more widespread social conclusions. So I think Stephanie Kelton's work is probably coming nearer to our work, is kind of coming in together, as it were. So certainly I would applaud MMT, but also the monetary reformers who spend a lot of time criticising the banks creating money as debt. They're on a very different tack in the early days, particularly from MMT. But I find that I find positive analysis in both of them, monetary reform and modern monetary theory. And I would, I've tried to, particularly in Debt and Democracy, I have a chapter there where I try to talk about all the modern monetary theories and try and make sense of them and how they interact with each other: state theory, credit theory. It's complex, but then economic analysis is complex. So we have to struggle with it, and it is a bit of a struggle, but it's worth persevering. I think, because I want to make the point that I think I've probably made it already, but I'll make it again. I'm not saying is you've got to destroy everything that is, like a sort of scorched earth policy of present economic theory, and put in a completely new one, and therefore completely reorder society. You need to reorder your thinking about society. You need to reorder your thinking about money, reorder your analysis. And then you have a different understanding. You see money as public rather than private. You can see it as sovereign rather than bank-led, and you reverse the dependencies. And this came in the second question that Giorgos asked about. He's sort of asking the question, well, how do we pay for all of this? Well, the point I'm trying to make is you don't have to pay for all of this, because the act of providing all the public and social services is the act of money creation. It's you have as much money as you want to have social relationships. So you have the example that everybody could do their own washing, or everybody could take in everybody else's washing. And in one case, you don't have a money system. In the other case, you do have a money system, but the washing gets done. And if you use biodegradable soaps or whatever, it's not more costly. The fact that you exchange tokens up and down the street as you take in each other's washing doesn't make a difference to the ecological damage of or not of the washing. You can all do it yourself, or you can do it with the exchange of tokens, and that's all money is. It's a density of. It's like a cobweb. which grows in all directions at once, and or like a mycelial growth under a forest. The monetary relationships reach out to each other and reinforce each other, and they don't. There's no fixed pool of money. There is as much money as you choose to have monetized relationships, which don't have to be debt-based, bank-based, for-profit market relationships. They can be public and social relationships. I think I'll probably leave it there because I've gone on a bit.
Thanks a lot, Mary, for your reactions. Before we move on to Mary commenting Giorgos' lecture, Giorgos, you want to say something more, or you're happy with that?
No, I'm not totally convinced, because I'm not saying how do you pay for it. I'm saying how do you know that you're not overspending? So how do you know that you're not overspending ecologically? So I can imagine a scenario where we all agree to spend things that they are nice, but then they use a lot of fossil fuels. Or they end up having repercussions that they are not obvious at the level of participatory budgeting, or that even the central bank doesn't see. So this I don't understand. So as I said, the scenarios we say in Barcelona, again, we need 100 new hospitals. So yes, there is no limit to pay for it. We can make money and pay for it, but there is an ecological limit to making 100 new hospitals, because they take cement, they're gonna take energy, etc. So where is this limit coming to us from? You know, this ecological limit. How is it limited what we can spend money to?
Yeah.
Not how we can pay for it, but how do we limit ourselves and we don't decide that we want to spend everything? No?
Yeah. Yes. Fair point. Well, you know that my proposal is participatory budgeting. That budgets are political. Budgets are the act of money creation by the public sovereign state, and therefore, if you have budgets that, if people participate in making those budgets, you bring in the integrated whole of human existence there. If you bring the people in, because they come in with their ages, their youngs, their sicknesses, their needs, but also you've got a chance to have judgments about the ecological damage as part of that consideration. So the chance to make the case for the environment will be in the participatory budgeting system, because the trade-off can be made by people themselves making the choice, rather than it being somewhere in the distant, far down the road, which they don't have anything to do. So I think more democracy can't be a bad thing when it comes to judging the ecological damage. In terms of limiting overspending, I've made the point that really there are monetary circuits. There's the state money circuit and the market money circuit, and I've analysed those in the paper. No, hold on, I've lost what I was saying. Yeah, so this raised the question of the role of taxation. I've talked about taxation as an act of retrieval, not an act of it's not gathering up the wealth of the market to put in the state. It's retrieving from the market money that the state has put into circulation through its activities. And the role, the ecological damage from the market system can be done, can be judged by fiscal measures, that is taxing resource use, and also putting in positions of disposal on disposal of waste. And so put the externalities have got to be put back into the market. The market's got to either pay for all its externalities, or it's got to stop creating externalities, particularly in the environment. And this is the political case has got to be made for this. But the more participation is, the more people will be encouraged to see that they benefit from But the area that worries me, and the question I would put to Giorgos, is in terms of my boxes, as it were, and the diagram I put up, the question of growth. How does the growth questions and ecological damage apply in each of those units, as it were? And particularly the one that concerns me is the unpaid, well, the care economy and domestic labour generally. And if you stop the use of fossil fuels and energy, what happens to domestic labour, which is very energy intensive? Because imagine, this often doesn't occur in ecological economics, but if you don't have fossil fuels, if you don't have energy, if you don't have power, then you're back to cold water washing, hammering things on stones, gathering water by hand, just growing food very intensively, labour intensively, not ecologically intensity necessarily. And what I've done in my earliest works, the ecofeminist works, was to go back through the history of non-industrial, pre-industrial societies, and found that women were dreadfully exploited and laboured day in, day out. So part of the convincing the modern society, modern populations about being ecologically careful is to have some solution about what we're going to do with household work when there's no dishwashers, no vacuum cleaners, no central heating boilers, no washing machines, no tumble dryers. I'm not saying you should have these things, but what is the implication for human labour, particularly female labour, if you don't have these things? And if I find that sometimes I show a slide of ecological man who's kind of sitting cross-legged with a lotus flower in his hand, and there's a woman with a mop and a bucket standing next to him saying, you know, whose nature here? You know, the lotus sitting cross-legged eco-pioneer, or the woman with the mop and the bucket looking extremely cross. So that's my. I don't know whether I've answered your question, but I've asked my question back. What do you do about the energy use of domestic labour, and how do you compensate for it? Hint, hint, can men do more housework?
Yes, I mean, if we follow this argument, then I'm not saying that you're saying that, but I mean, the logical implication would be to say that women, the condition of women has been improved over time because of because of energy and cheap fossil fuels. And I would be reluctant to say that. I think the position of women has improved to the extent that it has improved because of the feminist movement and because of political battles and political organizing and cultural changes. And I want to think that these changes have their own dynamic and are quite resilient. And I don't think that just by some kind of change in the energy or technological system, they would completely be inverted. So I don't think there is a direct correspondence always between the technological system, amount of energy, and gender relations. No, I think there is obviously a connection, but I think it's much more malleable than that. So I don't think that if, to the extent also that at least in some parts of the world, no, women are part now also of the paid workforce. I don't think automatically if there was more work to be done in the household would necessarily fall in the hands of women. It could happen if we had also, if this came together with a strengthening of patriarchal movement, a shift to more conservative values, people like Trump and this being in power and undermining gains of the feminist movement and rolling them back, etc. But I think it's a political battle. So I'm not sure that if we have less energy necessarily this means women will do the chore work, you know. I think it depends. That's one part of the question. The ecological response is that it doesn't have to be that little, the amount of energy. So I think the work of Julia Steinberger and colleagues there is very good. That they show that it is possible to reduce energy to global energy to 20% of what it is right now for 9 billion people, and have a decent amount of energy for everyone, you know, around the world. So they do the calculations and they say, yes, if you have a decent house with a normal use of energy, etc., it is enough, you know. It's not that we're gonna have to go back to the medieval ages, no. There's gonna be clean energy also produced, etc. So both ways, I don't.
Do you think the domestic needs, the essential needs to survive as bodily beings in the environment, will prioritize this world over the transport, or using cheaper energy for, well, like computing, the massive. We're being told we can connect and we can then lend each other money on the internet and communicate across the world, and yet there's this massive energy use to do it. Do you think that the innovations like that will be sidelined in order to produce more energy for domestic use?
I'm saying that, yeah. That will be the proposal. I'm not saying that this will happen or will happen easy, but I think the proposal, which comes also from this work that I see is shared also in the chat now, it is that if we calculate the amount of energy that is necessary for having a decent standard of living in the household and in public goods, that we do have enough energy with 1/5 of what we use now, which means that superfluous uses of energy for flying Learjets or for Bitcoin or things like that, you know, that these uses of energy would be zero, no? Now, how do you make this transition is super complicated. So I do take the danger. Sorry, I didn't mean to underestimate the danger of what you said. Within the current capitalist system, if suddenly fossil fuels were to finish and we had like autocrats like Trump taking power, the scenario you described is very likely, no? Is the one we have to fight against, of also regressing in terms of gender relations. But I'm saying that's not the scenario we are proposing forward, no? Of course, the scenario we're proposing forward is less energy, but sufficient energy, and going forward also with progressive change in gender relations.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I certainly think in the solutions you put forward in your paper, there's a lot of overlap between the position I'm developing coming from a different route, the economist route. You came more from the environment route, but I think the kind of solutions you put in your series of points at the end of your second presentation, there's a lot of commonality there. I think we're putting forward. I don't know whether we're winning the argument in the wider public or not, or whether we've all been taken over by pandemics, and whether we've got lost in the whether the pandemic situation will make us feel more humble as a human species, or whether it will just make us forget everything else apart from vaccination.
Okay, so it was great to have this first part of conversation between the two of you. Mary, do you still have some comments or questions related to the lecture of Giorgos, or you said what you wanted to say?
I think we've covered enough. I think we could move to the general questions now and to see what the other people who've read the papers are saying.
Great. So that's perfect. So thanks a lot for this first part. I think it was very important to put us into question. So let me go. There are many questions, of course, which cover a lot of issues. But let me move first to something that has emerged as a concern then there's a priority from the participants, which is what are the implications for the global south of your arguments. So I will first ask, you can comment on the issue as such, but I will first ask a question to Marie, and then there are some questions to for Giorgos. So to Marie, and this is the most voted questions by the participants, so it's an important one. The participant says, and I'm reading, global south countries are largely vulnerable towards dollars fluctuation and power.
Yeah.
What is your perspective thinking about democratizing the international monetary system?
Right. Yes, this is the question for finance of the age, isn't it? What we do. My case is that democracy, the money is not an economic phenomenon; it's a political phenomenon, a social phenomenon that's used for market purposes. But that money is an instrument of power. And it can be used for good or ill. It's harnessed by markets, but it's not the creature of markets. And therefore, what's important is to what MMT stresses a lot is the sovereign power to create money. The fact that governments can, the states do create money. And that as long as it's an autonomous sovereign currency, it can't be overrun by external currencies. But that's okay for saying that. But if you're a weak global currency and you're up against the dollar, it's a David Goliath thing. You can't stand up with great difficulty against the big main currencies, particularly obviously for international trade. If you have to buy goods and equipment from abroad, you have to have the dollars or euros to buy it. So this is a very difficult situation. I've got lots of answers for this question. The most important thing is that money exists in all known human society. There's something which can make judgments about the value, the relative value, not absolute value, but the relative value of society, the relative value of status, or the relative value of punishment, or the relative value of life rituals, birth, death, marriage, etc. And a lot of these are so all human societies have methods of valuing, and they can be if they're understood as social, then a domestic currency that allows people to interact with each other on the exchange of tokens can be a very democratizing thing. And it's not realized how important it is. In all the wars we have, the civil wars like Syria, Afghanistan, Libya, Iraq, the importance of it's underestimated, the importance of the power that creating a money system gives you. So you get warlords, for instance, issuing currency in their own sphere of influence. So the importance and the importance of the sovereign nature of money for societies that don't have big intensive marketing systems or market systems. The market system will be dependent on external currencies like the dollar, but the state money system may operate with a completely different currency. So I think I'm not probably making myself very clear here, but I think every society has to have a politics of money. That is, who controls the money? What is the dominant money system? Most developing countries have money systems that are largely state-based, and of course, there's all kinds of room for corruption there. If you're controlled of the treasury, then you can give the money to your people who are your group, your tribe, as it were, your group or your political movement. And therefore, politics is about the allocation of resources very directly through the controlled money system. So there's two ways forward. One is to, as far as possible, have money systems that are insulated from the world economy and the more powerful money like the yen or the dollar or whatever. And you try to insulate yourself so that you can have a local economy that is token based, that has a money system, but it doesn't interact with the wider economy. This is what Yanis Varoufakis was planning to do in Greece when the euro was threatened to be cut off from Greece, and they were going to stop. They were going to punish Greece for not obeying the dictates of the European Central Bank and the triumvirate of people putting money into Greece at the time. He was going to run the system on, I think, either the tax accounts or the social security accounts of the population, and have an exchange system based entirely on interaction and circulation of money within I think it's a taxation system. The other alternative is to sorry, it's not the other alternative. If you're going to, I think the Keynesian solution internationally is probably the best one. That is, you don't have global dominant economies. You have a buffer system of a completely separate global currency that each individual sovereign currency interacts with, that acts as a buffer between the strong economies and the weak economies. So my ideal would be is that for something that costs a week's labor in America, or a week's annual average salary in America, can be bought in, say, Nigeria for the equivalent of a week's wages in Nigeria, so that the cost to the local economy is the same, but it's equalized by the rate at which the two currencies go into the it was the Bancor system that Keynes had the idea. But so it seems to me that the lesson of the Global South is to take money seriously as a political instrument, and who has the power over money? Is it the market? Is it local warlords? Is it local government? Is it local oligarchs? Or who has the power over money, and how is money circulated? And then how is money? How can you insulate your money as far as possible from dominant currencies that will use their economic power to strip you of your resources? So I think there has to be a major politics of money at the global and a local level. Sorry, I took rather a long time to answer the question.
Oh, that was great, Mary. Thanks a lot. I think this is an important concern for participants, so I think it was worth taking the time for addressing it properly. So now to Giorgos. I mean, we have been mentioning in the rest of the summer school that we are not putting forward degrowth as a proposal for all over the world, but at least for industrialized countries. However, we have not had really the chance to discuss this in debate. So I'll now pose you two specific questions that came on this. The first one is, and I'm reading, do you think that the Global South, by abstaining from the use of products and services from the Global North, would already dictate the launch of degrowth globally? This is about the reduction of global demand. Example, Germany organizes its economy on 90% of exports. This could be a theoretical reduction initiated from countries in hegemonic disadvantage. This is the chance on a personal level and our family level. We just read production declaration and buy products from the global south and periphery. First question. And second question is, the participant says, I carefully followed your discussion. I'm really looking at us from global south that have energy poverty and very small percentage of people can afford renewable source of energy. Where do you think lies the great shift towards renewable energy in terms? What can lead to the devaluing of fossil fuels towards the shift of renewable energy? What do you think about the ecological debt, global south, global north? Is this too utopic? So if you could address a little bit this issue, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, the first one I haven't thought about. It sounds reasonable as an idea. It's a kind of what was the linking was the word, but the linking in terms of consumption, right? You're saying that global south, well, the global south is a bit of a big category, no? But okay, we're talking about lower income countries trying to reduce their amount of imports and producing things locally. Yeah, I think that would be in the direction of degrowth. I think we need to think more about the political economy of that and how it would happen. To that and other questions, I suggest the paper. Is it published or not? Have to check whether it's published or not, or he's still trying to publish it somewhere. But Jason Hickel, he shared it with my class. He had written a paper on MMT because it links the things we're discussing here. So it was about MMT as a decolonial strategy. So his argument, if I'm not misrepresenting it, is by doing if unilateral decolonization, he was saying. So if countries of the global south could do what Marie is proposing. I'm translating now. He's not talking about the work of Marie because I think he's familiar with MMT type of argument. But I'm saying, given the what you covered in this class. So if they were to, southern countries were to take control of the production of their money, and this way delink and sever the dependence on the imports from the global north, and then direct this for the support of industries that they're going to provide for basic needs, which addresses the second question. No? It's trying to kill two birds with one stone. No? One is to stop the dependence, and the other is like, how do you finance the type of transition? The second question was about how do you finance in poorer countries the transition to renewable energies, but for the time being they are more expensive than fossil fuels. No? So the idea would be that. So I think the ideas of Marie are not only for industrial countries, as he said, they are also for the rest of the world. And Jason Hickel is trying to make this link. Now there are he presented it in my class, and there were a lot of questions and objections that you can already start thinking about. It's like that many governments in these countries are not democratic and they are corrupt. So if you give them the money to do whatever they want with money, you're going to have a repetition of the experience of Zimbabwe, or I don't know, there's going to be money that is going to go to the pockets of the elites and they're going to put it then in London. But that was one type of concern. And the other concern was like the obvious global political economy, that this will never happen because the Americans are going to send the troops now. So both arguments are right, but they depend also on the balance of powers. The question is whether this could work. So this is an interesting set of questions to take from the combination of mine and Marie's presentation. Now, if you're from the global south and you're interested about the would monetary independence, under what conditions could it happen, and could it be directed in this progressive direction we're saying? Now, to the second question, more specifically about energy poverty, etc. I'm not an expert on renewables, but there are many people who are arguing that renewables right now are competitive cost-wise with fossil fuels. So I know that this is not how we see it, no? So even here in Spain now, they increase the electricity bills and they say it's because we're going to use more renewables. So normally it comes as more expensive, but I think again, it depends on the political economy, where fossil fuels are coming from, whether they're subsidized, what does the government pay for. So I wouldn't take it for granted. It could be the case, but I wouldn't take it for granted that, let's say, electricity produced by coal or oil right now is cheaper than electricity produced by solar or wind. Now, burning wood in the house, or like technologies that one step before in the transition, of course they remain cheaper. But I think energy poverty, I want to think that energy poverty in the global south can be tackled with renewables. Though I understand that this is debatable, but I think there is a case to be made for that. And then thanks for those who shared the paper I referred to. I see in the chat that you shared it. It was indeed the paper by, I keep forgetting the first author, and that's terrible. The second author is Julia Steinberg, and it's the paper on global environmental change on energy, which again shows that a decent level of energy standards for 9 billion people is possible, is sustainable, but it would require a radical reduction of energy use and a radical reorganization of how we live in the global north, together with an emphasis on basic provisioning in the global south, rather than a generalized growth of the economies there, where 80% of the energy is going to go to other things than the ones people need. So that would be the general directions along which I would think about these questions.
Yeah, fantastic. Giorgos, I think that helps to clarify the issue of degrowth in relation to the global south. So I will now move to the second set of questions, so to say, which you could expect very well, and which deal a little bit on the debate, let's say, capitalism versus socialism. I'm simplifying, okay? So keep this as the overall argument. And in general, there is one participant who asked about the commodification, no? In particular, how do you think we should go about the commodification as an economic or societal goal to change human relations towards non-market relations? So this is like the broad questions. Then I have one specific question for Mary, and then after I'll raise to Giorgos. For Mary, in relation to this issue, there is one participant who asked, and I'm reading the question literally, you said that the public social economy is monetized for organizational means rather than for profit interest. How does the privatization and commercialization of prior public goods, such as healthcare, fits into this? Isn't it a capitalist profit-driven characteristic that the market expands into all spheres of life step by step? End of the question. And of course, one can think here of the great transformation of Carpolani and so on and so forth. So, Mary, whenever you are ready.
To answer the second question first, the commercialization of the public sector, I call this publicization, not privatization. It isn't the private sector going to the public sector. It's the public sector accessing the monetary resources of the state sector. So therefore, it's the private sector publicizing its investment by not staying in the market but coming into the public economy. Therefore, it's not providing wealth to the public economy as the marketeers would say, that it's doing it more efficiently, and that's the case for going to the private sector. is it supposed to be economically more valuable because the market sector is more efficient? I just say it's the other way around. It's the private sector parasiting on the public sector and the public sector ability to create money. In the end, as I've said before, it's the ultimate source of money is the ability of a sovereign state to issue its own money, its own tokens, free of debt. It doesn't have to. It's not necessary to borrow or tax the private sector because, and this takes in my two circuits of money, the public circuit of money and the private circuit of money, which does interact and flow into each other. But the dynamics are state spend first, then taxation to reclaim or reorganize society fiscally through redistributive taxes or carbon taxes or whatever. So the pub. Oh, I've lost my train of thought there. But anyway, the private, as I said before, the ultimate, the one that stands up when all else fails is the ability of the state to reinstitute and reform and re-establish a monetary system. So I think that the commercialization of the public sector or the publicization of the private sector is an admission that the private sector can't provide the goods and services it promises. It can't provide the money, the goods and the services, because it has to, as it were, plug itself into the state of capacity to create money and circulate money through the public economy. So then that brings the commodification. I wasn't sure what the commodification question was actually asking. Obviously, I don't. I think there is a certain amount of the economy that could be commodified. You don't want to re-establish a command economy like the old Soviet Union, where they tried to plan everything to the last widget. There is certainly a role for the market economy and a commodified use of currency for the private provision of goods and services. But the political question is the balance between the two. What should remain in the market and what is more applicable to be in the public sector. And the case for privatization is that it's seen that the public sector is seen as leeching on the private sector. But as I say, that misunderstands. I think it works the other way around.
Yeah, that was brilliant, Mary. Thanks a lot. I think it really helps to clarify the issue. So on this theme, I would raise a couple of questions to Giorgos, which I think are somehow linked. So the first one goes as follows. It says, as mentioned in the lectures, green growth is the dominant strategies of international organizations, World Bank, IMF, multilateral climate negotiation, etc. How can we influence, convince such organizations to consider critiques on green growth?
It's difficult because these organizations are guardians.
So sorry, can I ask the second one, or you want to address this one?
No, sorry. Yeah.
The second one is, assuming degrowth as a post-capitalist perspective, would you say it could be a path towards socialism? I mean, the two questions are in fact quite different.
Yeah, the first one. These international organizations right now are guardians of the system, so it's really difficult to push them out of that. Of course, there are small openings. I think the OECD published or is publishing a discussion paper on beyond growth. So they are contemplating some of these questions. So there are openings within these organizations, but it's really hard to think how they will be pushed. I think they will be pushed by reality, social reality around them. So if there are social movements pushing in this direction, and if there are governments contemplating these different directions, and if there are the conditions with climate change and other problems become so intense that there starts being thinking outside of the box, these international organizations will follow. Yeah, well, that's my prediction. Now that within these organizations there are openings, there are people who think in this way, and they can be good allies, or that there can be reports published here and there and say something different. That's true, but from there to say that the dominant logic or the dominant line of promotion of these organizations is gonna change, it's not gonna be easy. How to do it? Yeah. How? Yeah. Sorry.
Can I add something on that?
Yeah, please.
No, because I mean I've been obliged to teach a course on this, like on international economics and this organization this year. So I've been looking a little bit more into the details. The problem on this, I think, is that if you look at how the international neoliberal economic order has been put into place after the Second World War, in particular with this organization, all of them are there to promote growth. So in different ways, of course. No, IMF wants the stability of the monetary system. World Bank wants to promote development, which is basically by funding development projects in the South. World Trade Organization wants to promote growth by liberalizing trade, and so on and so forth. So then it is difficult for them to question green growth, because it would mean to question the very objective by which they were created, because they wanted to promote growth. This is why they are there. No? So then there is a tension going on there, because obviously being within the umbrella of the United Nations, now these institutions, they have to somehow, at least in the rhetoric, play the argument of the sustainable development goals. No? But in my experience, from what I've been able to see, yes, they are taking into account the environment. This is a step forward. I mean, a little bit late, but at least they are doing it. But they're not going beyond the rhetoric. So World Trade Organization is completely lost after the Doha round. I mean, they haven't been able to reach an agreement. World Bank hasn't really changed anything apart from the rhetoric. For instance, most projects that they find is still building roads as it used to be, so no big change there. And same for the IMF. Of course, IMF is open, and if Irene Monasterolo was here, she could tell us, because they're taking into account climate finance and so on, but they're very far from questioning green growth, because I think it would mean to question themselves. So I think that is pretty tough. Obviously, these organizations are formed by states, but still dominated by basically the United States and big economic power. So I wouldn't expect a big change from there. We can push from the outside, from the social movements, as they've been doing since the 90s, but I think it's difficult to expect something from them. Sorry, Giorgos, for the interruption.
If I can come in.
Yeah, of course you can.
Yeah, the word socialism, socialism has been given such a bad press under neoliberalism in particular, that the concept is almost beyond use. That's why I tend to refer to the public and the social and democratic economy, because I think that that more expresses what we're talking about, because socialism has become tarred with, I don't know, Soviet repression and things like that. So, but sometimes I feel we should use the phrase, because why should we have let neoliberalism? I mean, neoliberalism has harnessed the word liberalism and turned it into just free marketeering, and that is a disservice to the concept liberalism, as all the taint has been to do it for socialism. So, and now there was another point I was going to make there, and I've forgotten what it. I'll come in if I remember what it was. It was another point I was going to make. Socialism. No, that one's gone.
Okay, no problem. So we can give back the word to Giorgos, which we both interrupted.
No,
thanks, Matt.
Whether the growth is because it's post-capitalist, it leads to socialism. I think it depends on how we understand socialism. So if we understand socialism as a common management of the commons, like an emphasis on the commons and a coming together at different levels and democratic management of the commons, then yeah, I think that's the idea, that it's underpinning and underlying the growth. If now we understand socialism as, I don't know, Sweden, or if we understand it as Yugoslavia, like a strong state, a welfare state, I think it's much better than what we have now, both Sweden and even Yugoslavia. But I'm saying Yugoslavia because it's not Soviet Union. It was supposed to be a more kind of decentralized and plural system. No? I think it's better, but I'm not sure that it's necessarily something that's going to be degrowth oriented now, because this system is also where growth is. So yeah, you can have socialism, and I mean many prominent advocates of socialism today are still making very growth oriented arguments, and they are among the fiercest critics of degrowth as much as any neoliberal economist. So yeah, my argument would be yes, that degrowth would require a transition to a system very different from capitalism that could be described as socialist, but it's not that the system that it is socialist, the way, especially the way we've experienced and many people describe socialism today, is necessarily going to be compatible with degrowth.
Yeah, I mean, the point you're making as well, isn't it, that a public economy can be equally growth-based if you're building prestige for huge airports and roads to nowhere and bridges to nowhere. So the public economy is not necessarily a green economy by any means. So yeah, so make that point.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. So having touched upon that, I'm moving to another topic, which broadly speaking we could call if you want, the politics of transition. And I have a question for Mary, which is a specific one. What do you think of the attempts of the European Union to create green public bonds? Is this conditionality a step forward, a step towards a fairer and ecological friendly monetary system?
I haven't particularly looked at the green public bonds. I think while the state can operate the cycle I've talked about, which is the creation of money and the retrieval of money, it can and does offer genuine opportunities for investment for people to use money they have. One of the other concepts that I've made, or no, that's just a second, that's gone. Yes, that the private sector doesn't make money. People in the private sector accumulate money, and the assumption is that if you've accumulated money, somehow you've been a useful person in society, you've made a contribution. Whereas in fact, all you've done is accumulate the money that's been circulating and sucked it up like a vacuum cleaner. So if people are going to harness and soak up the money that is circulating, and therefore to a certain extent take it out of circulation, then green public bonds may be a way of getting it back into circulation. But I imagine green public bonds are just covering up for the fact that this is a public creation of money, and you call them bonds and you sell them. But I would think that that's post hoc. I would think that they've the money is earmarked and then the bonds are sold. So it's selling off public expenditure in order to create an investment opportunity for the private sector. That seems to me what most bonds are. So they aren't raising money, they're just providing a way of letting people buy into, it's more publicization. People are putting their private money into the public economy, and therefore acting as a parasite.
Great, thanks for that, Mary. So along the lines of these debates on the politics of transition, I would have a question for Giorgos, which is the second most liked question, so an important one in this session. And the question goes as follows. The participant says, I have the feeling that strong political and economic actors have not yet accepted that we cannot innovate our way out of the ecological crisis. You explain that in the book you propose a transformative strategies of building new common senses slowly through deep cultural changes that are embodied and practiced in the making and defense of commons, articulated and generalized through political movements that promote such commons. What main obstacle do you expect to challenge that project, especially with regard to the translation into a political movement that will be necessary at some point?
I think there are internal and external challenges. The internal challenges are that the moment you become a political movement and you take power, you face the realities and the limitations of what you can do while in power, you know, and the limitations that the current democratic system puts on you. Like you have dear friends that they are elected now into the municipality of Zagreb, the capital in Croatia. Had the experience of the municipality here in Barcelona. So these are progressive movements that they were built bottom up from people. But once they take power, already you hear the disillusion. Now they can't do this, they can't do the other thing. Then the activists start getting demoralized that, okay, that was our best shot and the best we can hope for is like a little bit of increase in social housing, you know. We thought it was a revolution coming. So one is like how to negotiate this, how to negotiate the limitations the current political system is putting, because the current political system, if you go with the current, and you're part of the elites, the current system gives you many opportunities. But if you try to go against it, then it has many checks. You know, you see that even someone like Biden, who is not super radical, right, is a moderate centrist Democrat, but look how many obstacles there are in the US to do what he wants, you know, from the way a minority in the Congress does not let him spend what needs to be spent on climate change, for example. And that's a moderate. So imagine if you're a radical. Imagine if it was Bernie Sanders and he was in power, you know. And there were many other checks, I mean, within the political system. That limit, and then this creates disillusion with the base that supports these political movements, and the base then gets more radicalized and says we can't expect anything from the political system, and this either leads to retreat or leads to revolution. But what type of revolution and how, you know? So this I see is one big problem. How do these movements, when they take power, how do they manage to bring the necessary reforms at the scale that they're necessary, and how also do they maintain their connection to their base, which is very difficult. But of course, the big challenge is not just that. The big challenge is that there is an opposite current taking place, and there are other common senses being cultivated, and that they go completely in the opposite direction, you know. So we have Fridays for Future, but we also have crazy denialist and right-wing ideas, denialist about the epidemic, denialist about climate change, that they are also growing very big, you know. And they also have a political representation, which is in the new nationalist movements and in the new alternative right, you might want to call them, political formations, but they are growing around Europe and around the world, you know. So that's the biggest challenge, and that's the biggest threat, because these political movements, when they take power, they use it to crush crush the opposition and crush anything else. So for me, that's by far the biggest challenge. That, urgent as it is to do something just focusing on climate change, but it's not the only or necessarily the biggest problem. No? But urgent as it is to do something with climate change in Europe and North America, I mean, starting from there, not that it's the only ones who have to do, but they are the ones with the most responsibility and with climate debt to the rest of the world, no carbon debt. Urgent as it is, we know that in 4 years, you might have again a far-right government in the US and maybe in France, and knock on wood, not in Germany, no? But the prospect is there, and these people right now, and the common senses that they are fermenting them are completely denialists. It's like there's no problem. And these are just like cultural ideas that they are in the mind of left wing, that they want to worry us about the climate, etc. I mean, at some point, reality is going to be undeniable, like it happened with the pandemic, right? The pandemic moved a little bit fast. So at the beginning, you know, Trump was saying, no, there's nothing going on, you know. Bolsonaro is still saying it, but at some point, reality overwhelms you and you cannot deny it anymore. So Bolsonaro might say whatever he wants right now, but everyone knows that there is a pandemic. So he can't deny that, no? Or that hydrochloroquine is going to treat it or whatever, no? At some point, this stops being, but the problem with climate change is that by the time the reality will be definitely a reality, then the argument which you already see now being developed is, oh, now it's too late to do anything. So let's keep using fossil fuels at least to protect our country, you know, or our people. That's the threatening prospect. That's what I find the most worrying and the most threatening prospects to the positive vision we try to articulate in our book. In a longer version of the book, we had all this in there, but you know, we had to cut down, and then at the end, we stayed on the positive tone. But if we want to see the negative, because the negative is there and it's real and it's powerful, that's a very possible trajectory.
Great. Thanks a lot, Giorgos. Obviously, in this summer school, we are also exploring more in particular, no, the potential for an alliance between feminists and environmentalists, no, which we can also discuss after. But to give justice to the participants, I want to ask the next question to Mary, which is still part of this block on the politics of transition, and it's a question about local currencies. So the question is, the participant says, I would love to hear more of your thoughts on local currency, community organized systems, building sustainability and solidarity. They currently lack a political and commercial framework and have thus far failed to mount a substantial challenge to either the public currency or the commercial market. If this is the case, how is this different in the case of participatory budgeting, for example? So, Mary?
Local currencies. I have sort of ambivalent feelings about local currencies. Certainly they're great examples and innovations, and people learn a lot about money systems and how they operate. One of the things, positive ones, is that they show that you first got to issue your money. You can't start as an individual and make money in a new money system. Starting a new local or social or communal money system shows how much it's got to be a communal, social, or public money decision, because somebody's got to, some group has got to come together to organize in the case of the distribution of whatever the money form is, or keep the record of it. So if it's the local exchange trading schemes where you keep records rather than issue tokens. So all examples of local and social money shows that money systems have to be created, formed. They are conscious organizations that have a social origin, a point of creation. And that's the main thing I learned from them. The second thing, though, is that how just having a money system and calling it a money system doesn't make it a money system. Like Bitcoin, to me, isn't a money system. It's a Ponzi kind of speculation of non-fungible asset. I don't know. It's whatever it is. It's not a money. A money system has to be socially representative of the community. It has to be a monetary community of some sort, and these tend to be in history around social locations, communities in the environment, or whole societies. Money systems have to be universal within whatever boundary they are. So if you've got a local economy and only certain people join it, then to me that's not a money system as such. If everybody in the local community joined it and you pooled all your resources, and then you've created a local money system. So I think that money systems have particular characteristics, and they need to be, there's a social and the point of creation, and they need to be representative of a society of some sort that is fairly comprehensive. So they're public and social to their core, and that's what we learn from the local social economies. So I think you can set up local economies and social economies, but if they sit embedded inside a wider social economy, your local currency of your state or your region or whatever it might be. So yeah, just saying you call this money doesn't really make it a currency. Right. So I hope that made some sense.
That was great, Mary. Thanks a lot. We're going towards the end of the session. There is only 15 minutes left, but we still have time for a couple of questions. So the next one for Giorgos in this blog, it's related to the commons. So the question is the following: what do you think the political pathway is to the reclaiming of the commons? In recent years, several radical political theorists have given their analysis of the present conjuncture, most notably, to my mind, Joel Wainwright and Joe Mann, Andreas Malm, and Naomi Klein. Do you have any comments on their work and how it overlaps with your vision?
I saw this comment and I'm laughing because I was thinking that I'm at an age that, life, I recently had children, I have like many obligations, and then there's a point in life where you stop reading others and you start writing yourself only, the little time that you have, you devote it to write. So I feel ashamed to say that I haven't read the latest things. So I haven't read the first two authors. I know what Andreas is talking about, but I haven't fully read his books yet. And Naomi Klein also, I've seen This Changes Everything. I've read part of This Changes Everything. I had read all her previous books. So when you're younger, I think it makes a little bit sense. It's a little bit like the overlapping generations model in the finance, no? Like when you're young, read, and then once you've read and you've articulated a little bit your abilities to communicate it, what you've learned from reading, start writing about it, Ideally, I should keep reading everything and write at the same time. But right now I say, okay, what is more important? To also communicate what I've learned this past year, so also keep reading and never write myself. So sorry to say that I haven't read these other big thinkers. So yes, Andreas' work, I know what it is about because I've heard him present, and I know the argument, and it's a Leninist, trying to reclaim a Leninist approach to the urgency of climate change. He's arguing that given that how urgent we say things are, and given that the power of the change necessary is massive, there's no other way of thinking about that outside of the state and outside of a massive intervention of the state. And given how tight the state is right now to capitalist interests, it's impossible. Maybe I'm caricaturing his argument, right? So apologies for that, and apologies if you're someone who has read it carefully and you're a fan of his work. I really like his work too, no? So I'm caricaturing how I've understood his argument. So I've understood that the argument is like, given that there's no way out of a massive state transformation of people are using metaphors like the Second World War, etc., and that we need to reclaim the state, we have to think in the terms that revolutionaries of the previous century were thinking, like Lenin, of taking control of the state and changing the machine. There is something in this argument, but the question is like, who is going to do that and how is it going to do that? So this is where my reading is limited. I'm sure that Andreas has answers to that, but I mean, I can't see something similar to the Russian Revolution taking place today. And even more, I can't see it taking place in the name of stopping climate change, you know, because stopping climate change is not the poor and the dispossessed raising to take control to spread the wealth to themselves, but it's everyone, the poor, raising to take control of the state and retreat, you know. It's even more difficult. So we are grappling a little bit with this type of questions in our book, and thanks to one of our co-authors, Giacomo D'Alisa, the approach we take to these questions is another old Euro-communist take on these questions, which comes from the work of Antonio Gramsci, and that's the political vision we articulate in the book. So please, you tell me how the vision we articulate relates to these other big thinkers. I just make it how it articulates to what I think Andreas Malm has argued. So in relation to Andreas Malm, we emphasize the point that this kind of revolutionary change is not gonna come suddenly from people from the outside unless you have a certain level of cultural change also permeating. And it's not gonna happen also, it's not gonna have any effect if there is not this cultural change, because which is, if you think of a vanguard of an elite, like it was the Bolshevik party that takes power and then says like, we're gonna have to change everything in a climate change safe direction, etc., people are going to rebel against them. It's like, what are you talking about? You're a minority, we're not with you on that, you know, we just want to live the way we lived. So the only way out of this conundrum, and that we try to spell out in the book in a Gramscian sense, is like, how do you build this political movement? Through cultural change, you know? And how do you build this cultural change? We argue in the book is by practicing and by building the different world you want to build today in the commons. So we emphasize a lot of the cooperative economy as prefigurative, and also of changes in our everyday life and how we live, as prefigurative of what we want to create. But we take also distance there from the anarchist approach, which is we don't want to think about the state, we just change what we do together at the community level, and we forget the state. So the Gramscian approach, I think, is a little bit halfway between the statist, Leninist, and the anarchist view, which says like, we change and we create change in our everyday life spheres, so that to create the sensibilities to build a political movement that then takes control of the state and allows this type of sensibilities to become dominant. So that's the model we put down in our book with Giacomo Federico and Susan Paulson. Now, the criticism that I hear, and it's right, is that this is a very long process. It hasn't taken place the last 100 years since Gramsci wrote his books, and it didn't take place even with communist parties that they were trying to do this thing in much better organized ways than we are trying to do that. They had their own co-housing projects, they had their own support structures, you know, where they were cultivating a sense of the commons. And so why would you expect it to take place now, and how would you expect it to take place at the speed necessary to respond to the unraveling that it's taking place in front of our eyes right now? So I take this criticism and I don't have an answer. I think it's good not to have an answers to so complicated issues, which are ultimately, they are political, you know, and I think political questions do not have only theoretical answers.
Thanks, Giorgos. We have 10 minutes until the end. So I have one question for Mary. Maybe Giorgos wants to comment also after. And the question is the following. The participant thanks you for the brilliant lecture, and she says, and I'm reading, I was wondering about the implications of the socially constructed nature of money. Doesn't the trust and therefore the value of money depend on a certain perception of scarcity? What would be needed for this to change?
Oh, what a wonderful question, because of course money only exists because we trust it. It has no. One of my favorite slides is when I say to an audience, what backs our money system? And I put up a blank slide, because nothing backs our system except everything. Because we're socially trusting each other. Money is social trust between a universal community of money holders. And the money can take any form. It can be from whale's teeth to bank accounts. It's all a record of the obligations and entitlements we have as humans in society. And that's all a money system is, and always was. And in fact, if you try to make a money system have a real value, a commodity value, because that's the only monetary value you've got, is a commodity value, then this ceases to be money, because if you value, for instance, gold, you have to value it in terms of something, or you value it in terms of silver. And then, well, how do you value silver? Well, in terms of gold. Or you say the same with modern currencies. What's a dollar? How do you guarantee a dollar? And they say, well, it's so many euros. Well, but what's a euro? Well, it's so many pounds. So the illusion that we have some kind of core source of value in our money is completely wrong. And money is not scarce. Gold is scarce, silver is scarce, but I don't think gold and silver ever were seriously money. I mean, the Charlemagne issued a whole new the first European currency of silver currency to try and do a fixed value currency. And it was debased within 2 years because it was useless as money, because there's not money needs to be scarce. Money needs to be not scarce. Trust must not be scarce. Trust isn't scarce. So there is an illusion that money there's a shortage of money. Where's money to come from? Who's going to pay? All these questions you've got, there's not enough to go around. There is as much money in a system as you want there to be. You have to manage it once it's in, for instance, between the public sector and the market. But so the myth of money is that it was founded in market systems. It's a complete myth that the essential money ideally should be a scarce something like gold or silver. Money must be as plentiful as you need to create the goods and services that you want to create, sustainability, etc. To take into account of limitations, ecological limitations, etc., etc. But and this isn't saying an ideal. This is my philosophy of what a future money should be. This is what all money systems are, even if they look more valuable, like a gold coin. But that is not representative of money. And this is why the Bitcoin was totally misconceived. That the idea of making a currency valuable is to put a limit on it at 20 million or whatever it is. But that's made it useless as money. It's made it valuable as a Ponzi commodity, but it's useless as money. Money must be completely neutral, value free, money value free. It just has to be a relative yardstick of comparison. There is no absolute and there's no scarcity.
Excellent, Mary. Thanks a lot for that. Obviously, there are still many questions about taxes, central banks, inflation, etc., etc. We won't have time to cover that. I'm keen to close the session by giving the chance to both speakers to maybe make a last statement, a kind of a take-home message, if you wish. In fact, I wonder, for instance, whether Giorgos wanted to comment on the social construction of nature, scarcity, since he recently published also a book on limits. But you don't have to, I mean, you choose. Giorgos can go first, and then Mary, just the last statement, whatever you want to say, what you think should be important for the participants to keep in mind and we have not covered in these 2 hours. Thanks.
Well, it would be big to open the question of social construction of nature and scarcity as a final intervention. No, I really enjoyed it, and I think there were many good questions. Impossible. As I was scrolling through them, and there were so many. I wish I could reply. I think I only replied to one, and then I stopped because I realized it's too much. But it seems you're a great group of participants here, and I hope you took something from our presentation. What I would keep is as the general way is that we need a big systemic change, and we need it fast, and that there are proposals out there on how things could work differently. Mary has a great proposal regarding money, which is a central aspect of current society, and there are other great proposals, I think, for other aspects, for labor, the working hour reductions, for social security, the basic income and services, etc. Educate yourself if you haven't on these proposals, because it's important to know that there are alternatives, but there is no alternative to the fact that these alternatives will not go anywhere unless there is the political organizing to bring them forward. And I think this is where we stumble. And as I said, the answer there is not theoretical, unfortunately. Theory can imagine, no? Theory can tell you that things could go this way or should go this way or could conceivably go this way. But whether this happens and how it happens is not a matter of only of thinking.
Excellent.
My point is that the limits are real, that we, as embodied beings in nature, the limits are real, and the impact of what we do is real. Money is not real. Money is a social construct, and therefore the two things are on completely different dimensions, and therefore the limitations in nature is absolute, money is relative.
Excellent. So thanks a lot to both Giorgos and Mary. Obviously, we hope that this very humble summer school can contribute to change, and your presence here, I think, has been very important. Somehow I start to feel tired, generally speaking, so I hope I start to say this kind of thing so the next generation will take it. But people are saying in the chat, don't stop writing, don't stop working, because what you do is very important. So thanks a lot for being here today and for sharing your wisdom. Thanks a lot to everyone, and keep up the fight. Cheers.